Hello, everybody. It's Friday, November the 29th, the day after Thanksgiving. Last Friday in November. Lots of tech news, even though it's a quiet week traditionally, Thanksgiving week. A lot of it focuses on Musk and Ramaswamy's Doge plan to reform government. And that was the week newsletter. Keith connects with a piece both from the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. They may not agree on politics, but they agree that this is a lot of news. And other heavyweight Silicon Valley people are throwing themselves into this. Mark Andreessen this week gave an interview to Joe Rogan in which he backed the Musk plan to reform government. And that's the focus of Keith's newsletter this week: modernization, regulation, and costs, culture wars, Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. In the editorial, Keith is, and I have to admit, I was a little surprised on this, slightly ambivalent. I have thought, Keith, you'd have rather liked the idea of Musk and Ramaswamy and Andreessen going into DC and cleaning all the inefficiencies up. What's the problem with it?
Well, that first Wall Street Journal piece is written by them, so it's kind of like a manifesto. And what it does is it says three things. Firstly, that there are lots of bureaucrats who've been there for decades, unelected, effectively deciding policy through choosing what to implement and what not to implement, and many of them have got to go. I don't really disagree with that. There's probably a lot of truth, and there's lots of scope for getting rid of a lot of the permanent civil service. The second thing they say is that government procurement is out of control, and that most of the money spent on behalf of the citizens is not coming directly from law that Congress passed, and that a lot of it could go as well. And then the third thing they say is that there are too many regulations standing in the way of just getting stuff done. Now, I don't really object to any of the three, but I don't really think the problem of government is summed up by those three. What is super disappointing is, given that they're technologists, is there is no narrative about making government more modern. Saving money by doing it better using technology, so cheaper, better, faster isn't part of it. It's just cheaper. That's all they're focused on. So they're coming across as zealots for small government and not correlated at all, except for the money spent, with what the citizenry should be expecting of government, which leads me to think they don't really have an answer to the question, what is good government? They just don't have the answer to that. They don't understand that government is a service organization for citizens, and that it should be good at delivering services, not just cheap, but good. And
I'm not defending them. In fact, I'm not sympathetic to what they're saying in any way, but I don't think they just miss this, Keith. They just don't like government. They think all government's bad. So your editorial is very interesting. You talk about government as a service to the people. It sounds like a term being used in a business plan to raise some money. What exactly in your mind is government as a service, and how could technology be used?
Well, for me, government is the end result of citizens deciding what needs to be provided to all of us by the people we elect and the taxes we pay. So good government is government that aligns with the customer need. And in the case of government, the customers are us. And the services they provide are everything from rules of the road, education, which is a local matter in America, criminal law, everything that if you to reduce it down to one word, it's society. Government produces society, and we live in that society, and we expect it to deliver. So we want the DMV to be a good experience. We want the emergency room in the hospital to be a good experience. We want education to be a good experience, and so on and so forth. So you can deliver any service in millions of different ways, some of them super inefficient. And I don't disagree with Musk and Ramaswamy that that is the case. But your goal is to be a good service provider to your customer, which is us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, think about this out loud, whether one of the ironies of this is the Republicans are leading on using technology to undermine government. But actually, one of the consequences is that they open intellectually the Pandora's box of how technology can make government better. And it will enable progressives like Tim O'Reilly and so many others who want to use government as a service in the way you're talking about. So, as so often, it's the Republicans who are leading the way, but the Democrats should, and I think inevitably will, have their own plans on this.
Well, I think the Democrats focus a lot on policy and not very much on delivery. I think there's a huge separation between a policy wonk and an operational delivery mindset. And that most politicians are not, and certainly bureaucrats, civil servants, they're not technical enough to be product managers. And what the government really needs is a product manager delivery mindset whose goal is good service at low
But
cost.
people like Tim O'Reilly understand that. There are a lot of people who sort of move on the escalator between Northern California and Washington D.C. who get it. I wonder whether, what's his name, the transportation secretary would be on board for this. Buttigieg, who of course
Yeah.
Is one of the smarter people in the Biden administration, a McKinsey person, whether he would certainly understand these issues.
You would think so. I mean, he was in charge of transport, wasn't he? Or was it energy or transport?
He was in charge of transport. I mean, it does open up, I think, an interesting opportunity for a government as a service, to borrow your language, modernizer, to run, because as we think about 2028, most of the people we're still talking about as potential Democratic nominees are still very traditional politicians. And I'm not sure whether a traditional politician is able to even conceive of this language.
Well, Musk is coming across as a kind of a greedy billionaire that doesn't want his taxes
Yeah, and he's not
paid.
running. I mean, let's be clear, Musk is not president, so he's been appointed by the president. So it's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly right. But you're right. I mean, Buttigieg does seem to have a brain that cares about things like this, but I don't think he has the ability to execute a plan or even know what the plan should be. Just take the difference between long distance trucks and Uber. How good is Uber at knowing where a car is and whether it's going to get to you versus FedEx? You know, you have no clue what time they're going to show up.
Well, you do. I mean, in defense of FedEx, they certainly have a better clue than the post service, the post office, where
well, they're all
not only do you not know when it's going to show up, you don't know if it's going to show up.
right. They're all terrible, Andrew.
Well, they're not that. I'm not a big fan. I think FedEx is pretty good, actually. They give you a window and they always show up.
I've had windows quite often where they don't show up, and but I don't. It's not a big point, so let's not go down a rat hole.
But I think the bigger point is an incredibly important one, and I think this is where innovation. I mean, you always claim to be a man of the left, as you know. I'm sometimes a little skeptical of this, but in progressive terms, this is where progressives have to go.
Yeah, I think what you want is, and we'll get to this later in the show. You want government to focus on service delivery, not on regulation. Now, Musk is kind of right there. There's a lot to like about what him and Ramaswamy are saying, so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But given who he is, you would think there was more of a vision than comes out of that manifesto for good government. It just doesn't exist.
Right. No, I think, and I think you're I think your editorial this week is a good one. I don't always like to agree with you, Keith, and we're supposed to disagree, but I think this is it's an important point. I wonder also, just again thinking out loud, whether there'll be cracks within the Trump administration, because Musk and Ramaswamy, I mean, they are in their own way libertarians, but they're not against government. They just don't want to do away with it. And some of Trump's appointments are so ludicrous. He's clearly appointing people who are by definition incompetent, so the government will just fall to pieces. And I'm guessing that neither Musk nor Ramaswamy would celebrate that, where entire government departments would just collapse.
Yeah. Well, there's this word in Silicon Valley which comes to the crux of this culture war comment, which is creative destruction. What I'm seeing so far is destructive destruction, not creative destruction, because the creative bit is missing. What do you want to replace it with? Is not even a question.
But at least the conversation's starting. And now I wouldn't say impressed, but I'm struck by the fact that Andreessen is also throwing his metaphorical hat into this, aggressively supporting what Musk is doing at Doge. Is this the first time, Keith, and you're a long-time observer, is this the first time that serious Silicon Valley values, or what you might think of as culture, has come to Washington, D.C.?
I can't remember a previous time, so probably, yeah.
So it's in its own way, even if this first draft will probably be a farce and a failure like so much else in the Trump administration, it is a big deal. It's significant in historical sense, because I don't see them being able to go back now. I mean, even if this fails miserably, they're forcing the Democrats to respond. The Dems can't just come in and say, well, we're going back to the old 20th century bureaucracy, which everybody knows is inefficient and incompetent and sometimes even corrupt.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Serge Solkat, who's watching us, has sent a text saying, "What about Lena Khan?" And
Your favorite girl, Keith.
And well, I mean, it's in a way it's a good question, because she does sum up the Democrats' view of innovation, which is to slow it down.
Yeah, or split it up.
Exactly. I'll split it up. And there's been a flurry this week of new FTC lawsuits, one against Microsoft, one rumored against Uber, as well as the DOJ thing against Google. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Republicans think about regulating technology companies. I'm not convinced they'll be that much different to her, but we'll see.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't see people like Andreessen and Musk and Ramaswamy. I mean, they may not like Google, but they're not going to be able to get away with breaking up companies and punishing companies they don't like and then promoting their own. It would be so obviously corrupt. I think the Democrats are doing themselves a profound disservice by using these last few weeks to throw as much at the wall when it comes to regulation, because first, it doesn't make any difference in the long term, and secondly, as you say, it reflects them as a reactionary party, a party of the previous century, a party who just doesn't get it, that they don't understand that something has profoundly changed. But that isn't something to be mourned. It's something to be celebrated and used creatively.
Yeah, and I do think, despite my editorial, this is a moment to open up that conversation. That's why I didn't just say yes, because it's easy to say yes to the Musk stuff because a lot of it is common sense, but it isn't enough. The thinking hasn't gone far enough, and it needs to keep happening.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of the more interesting aspects of the Trump administration. A lot of people expect Trump and Musk to have a big fight, which wouldn't surprise me. But in the first year, it'd be interesting to see what gets done, whether it'll be like the wall in the first administration, a lot of talk, but nothing happens. Meanwhile, what about on the AI front? You link to something that Mark Benioff published in Time, which is, of course, a publication he owns. So in a way, it's his, just as Musk tweets on X. So Benioff writes an editorial in Time about how the rise of new digital workers will lead to an unlimited age. Before we get to Benioff's point about AI, how central do you expect AI to be in this Doge initiative? You'd think that it's not coincidental that AI is changing everything and it will change government.
I'm a bit of a skeptic because I don't think there's anyone in government that can properly conceptualize how AI could improve government.
Well,
Even
there's
Musk.
Musk and Ramaswamy. Why not?
Well, funnily enough, Musk compartmentalizes AI into, Musk has been the cheerleader on how dangerous it might be. So he's building Grok or XAI. And there's a story about that this week, but I don't really get the sense of him being a cheerleader for its execution. The obvious place would be education, where you could revolutionize teaching and marking. That would be very obvious. Probably diagnostics in health as well.
Yeah, but
There are-
there's a broader. I mean, it seems to me that AI would be, as technology, is the perfect antidote to bureaucratic excess, where it's transparent, where we're not relying on bureaucrats, incompetent bureaucrats, anonymous bureaucrats. The more AI is used in government, the more efficient it becomes. I mean, obviously, there's the critique that AI promotes agendas, classes, genders, skin colors, all the rest of it. We've heard that, and we will continue to hear it. But I would have thought that government is the perfect petri bowl, a laboratory to experiment with AI.
Even more specifically in particular branches of government. But I think the price of medicines, for example, AI could play a huge role in policing pharmaceutical companies as sellers to governments as buyers. There's so many different things, but for that to happen, there has to be an understanding of it, which I think we're a little bit early in the cycle of AI for there to be the right people in the right places. I can imagine a typical meeting at the Department of Transport where some young person, there's an article about this week, some young person who does understand AI advocates for it, and the kind of lifers who've been there for 40 years raise their eyebrows and frown. That's
Right, but that's the nature of change, and that's what Musk and Ramaswamy, they're going to get rid of those eyebrows, push them out. The big question, of course, is even if AI is successful, there are hundreds of thousands of people employed in DC and the rest of the bureaucracy. What's it going to mean for employment? Benioff talks about this in his piece, how the rise of new digital workers will lead to an unlimited age. It's not the first or the last cornucopian piece about AI. What does Benioff say? Benioff's a progressive. You'd think he would actually be the kind of person who could help and back an O'Reilly-style initiative to make government a service in DC.
Yeah.
Is Benioff's optimistic? What are people going to do when they're all replaced by AI in DC?
Well, so Benioff's speaking with his Salesforce hat on in this editorial.
As he always does, as the owner of Time, of course.
He owns Time, so he's got his own platform, and what he's saying stuff that we've said a lot on That Was the Week, Andrew, which is, the end of jobs is a good thing. Which for the head of Salesforce, which 200,000 people show up to his event in San Francisco every year, where he's talking about salespeople using tools to sell to customers and manage customers with all the marketing and CRMs, everything. The fact that Salesforce has unleashed AI agents to do a lot of those tasks indicates that he believes that software is going to replace people. which makes common sense.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to be as smart as Mark Benioff to get that. So what are people going to do? The rise of what is a new digital worker? Is that an AI, a bot?
Yeah, so the unlimited age is speaking to the output. So if you think of AI as a set of tools, the output is stuff, whatever stuff is. It could be email marketing to sell stuff, or it could be outputs could be cars produced on robotic production lines. The outputs become unlimited because you don't need people to make them. And in the context of the declining population, that's probably a good thing. And so, to your point, the question then becomes, what happens to the people? And I think that is where the social
Which is
discussion.
not an unimportant question.
It's an important question, and only a small number of people are thinking about that question.
A lot
Everyone,
of economists are. I mean, economists have been obsessed with this question for years, even before LLMs and the latest AI revolution. Is what happens when you have smart machines? What are people going to do?
well, there's a lot of hand waving that says people will learn new skills and there'll be new jobs, which is probably wishful thinking in this
Right.
age.
So Albert Wenger, friend of mine, you know him very well. He had a book out a few years ago, The World After Capital, in which he said everyone will be free to be creative. He's not the first or the last person to say that. Is that beginning to happen? You link with Ted Joyer, who's no great fan of the digital revolution, who argues that power is shifting rapidly to indie creators. Is that because of AI?
No, I think that's because of digitization in general and the availability of completely inexpensive tools that allow people like you and me to produce the same outputs that in the past would have needed a satellite television station to do.
But Keith, I mean, I've written books about this. We've been hearing about this for years, ever since the internet was invented. Power is shifting rapidly to indie creators. I'm surprised that Joyer, who's a skeptic and has been through a number of these cycles, believes this. What's changed then? Why does he believe now when he's always been a critic?
I think it's what we talked about last week, Andrew. The catalyst is that Joe Rogan moment in the election when people like Ted began to realize that the world has already changed and that the centers of authority and power are decentralizing down to individual creators with a megaphone. And that leads to a landscape that doesn't look like the old landscape.
Yeah, but we've known that for years. I mean, from the blogging revolution onwards. I mean,
But
okay,
don't you
Rogan's
think
slightly different, but it's still a winner-take-all startup entrepreneur kind of economy. He makes a lot of money. Nobody else does.
winner takes all is probably a bit too extreme? I think it's plural, winners take all. And there
Three,
are a lot,
maybe not one.
yeah, there's quite a lot of winners. You and me, of course, are completely pissed off
Well,
because
we're losers, Keith.
we're
You and I.
losers. Exactly.
That's why we're doing this the day after Thanksgiving. We're not better to do.
Yeah, we're totally losers. But that's because we don't care about money, Andrew. We want to be happy.
Yeah, maybe we're not even human. Maybe we're AIs. Meanwhile, the traditional creative community concerned with AI is coming out. You link to a piece which references Ben Affleck, who's been rather skeptical and worried about AI from Hollywood. Do you expect, I mean, with Web 2 and even Web 1, the first industries to be radically affected was media. Is that going to happen with AI too, do you think?
What specifically do you mean? What? Give me an example.
Well, I don't know. Web 2 with Napster fundamentally undermined the music industry, or Web 2 killed the regional newspaper.
Yeah.
Affleck is concerned that AI might kill traditional Hollywood, which for many of us isn't necessarily a bad thing. But do you expect this AI revolution, which is for real? I don't think anyone would deny that.
Yeah.
Is it going to begin to really fundamentally alter something like Hollywood, which
Yeah.
spends billions of dollars producing, writing content which can be with people that can be replicated now with algorithms?
Well, Affleck actually is probably a very sane voice on AI in Hollywood. He's saying basically he's saying that Hollywood's really good at incorporating new stuff and using it to make more money. And his belief is that AI isn't clever enough to replace. It's only clever enough to be added to the current set of tools that Hollywood uses. And so he's saying to people, look, his big quote was AI can't make art. And, so creativity, he thinks still belongs to humans. And if you think of the music industry in Hollywood, they are really good at incorporating new stuff. Music genres change at the level of the street, but are very quickly incorporated into Warner Brothers Music or Sony or whoever it ends up being. And the same's true in Hollywood. I mean, the use of FX, the tools made to produce movies, digital animation of leaps and bounds, much more than industry. Industry is a laggard when it comes to adoption. So I think Affleck is right that AI is going to help Hollywood, not replace it. But a lot of the trade union people in Hollywood don't agree. And I think what we're going to find is trade unions become the modern laggards because they're scared of losing jobs. So they want to slow down technology, when creators are the opposite. They want to embrace technology.
Yeah, it's interesting whether, I mean, we've been through so many of these cycles before, beginning with the Luddites. I did an interview this week. I was in New York last week with Stephen Levy, one of tech's most successful and visible journalists, and that's our keen on interview of the week. Levy, I asked him this question about whether AI is different in terms of this radical transformation. He doesn't seem to think it is. It's just another cycle of radical optimism, massive investment, which will probably result in some sort of bust, but will maintain some degree of innovation. So that's the really interesting question, is whether this AI revolution is different. Levy, I don't think he believes it is. He's not radically surprised. I mean, he's amazed with AI technology, but he's not radically surprised with the consequences. So we've been through this before, cycle after cycle. As I said, my only skepticism is with people like Joya, who believe that power is shifting rapidly to indie creators. We've heard that so many times before, and I have to admit, once or twice or three times you're burnt, and you don't go back. Meanwhile, your startup of the week, Keith, is focusing on this. It's Musk's new venture into AI game studio. He wants to make games great again. What's Musk doing? As you said earlier, that he's a skeptic of AI, but he has his own AI startup now, which is worth, what, $40, $50 billion. So he's not a complete skeptic.
Well, he's a skeptic when it comes to the need to control it.
He's a skeptic, I think, when it comes to other people's AI.
Other people's AI as well. Skeptical. And the fact that he's focused on games is kind of interesting, because games are a safe space in a way for him. The reason I put it in, I don't know if you remember, but a couple of weeks ago we had a piece from Idan Beck talking about the new game studios that are going to emerge based on AI, and he's building a startup in that space. So this caught my attention, just because Idan should pay attention to this as well. And Musk is nothing if not opportunist. He's very good at smelling timing and committing resources. And of course, he's capable of raising very large amounts of money. By the way, the people who paid him to buy Twitter are getting stock in some of these new initiatives as a way of paying them back. So it's kind of a bundle of value, if you will, that he can trade.
So what exactly does this mean, his new venture into AI game studio? Does that mean that AI will create the games, so they're replacing the programmers, the creators? What's the role of AI in games, in his view?
I think probably at every stage of a game, AI will play a role, from the initial storyboarding and the game mechanics, the scoring, the levels, just imagining the puzzle that a game is, then rendering it, then building the code that makes it work. I think at every stage, and probably even marketing it. So if you really empty your mind of the past value flows in games and start from scratch with what can AI do, the answer is everything.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not a gamer myself, but I can imagine AI in that sense replacing most traditional studios, which I'm sure won't thrill the owners of studios. It'd be interesting to see whether it will have an impact on the kind of games that exist, and whether it will result, like in vinyl, in a renaissance of human created games versus AI ones, and whether anyone will be able to tell the difference.
Yeah. And you know, that brings us back to the question of Ben Affleck. I was kind of with Affleck when it comes to Hollywood and creativity. I'm kind of a bit with Musk when it comes to games, and they're different. AI's role in games can be a lot more. I still don't think the creative bit will come from the AI alone. I think it's going to need a human imagination to work with AI to produce interesting games.
But also, I mean, to come back to Hollywood, I mean, most of the products out of Hollywood are so bad anyway that I don't see how AI can make things worse. I mean, I don't know how many terrible movies your kids drag you to, but most of these monster films and remade monster films are just dreadful. I mean, to me, they should have already been made by AI. They don't have any human qualities at all. So
There's
I have to
also
admit,
there's
I'm not too
also
worried about Hollywood.
there's also a lot of terrible indie movies. I watched the one with Jennifer Aniston, was it, with a daughter and the mum was dying. God, what a terrible movie. But it was an indie movie where AI did nothing. It was all human.
Yeah, I think I'd read such bad reviews of that, I chose not to go. Finally, post of the week. You've taken some liberties with this. It's a link from Herbert Hovenkamp, who sounds like an AI, but apparently actually exists. He's a professor at Penn Law School, the Wharton School, and he wrote an interesting piece in the New York Times about breaking up Google would be a big mistake. What does it's his name, Hovenkamp, say?
Camp. He's basically making the point that there's no citizen benefit from breaking up Google, and in fact, quite the contrary, maybe even negative from the US economic point of view. So he's making simple, common sense points about the DOJ is seeking to break up Google, and the fear is that the DOJ will get away with it because it comes down to a single judge right now. Maybe that will go to the
Yeah,
Supreme.
but it's gonna be so many different hearings and so many different chapters of this that I don't see how they. I mean, your friend, your girlfriend, Lena Khan is going to be leaving. So once she leaves,
Well, this is a bit too late for that. Google has been found guilty of having a monopoly in advertising, which by the way is absurd. Anyone who understands the advertising business,
you and I have talked about this.
but so it really isn't one. But it's been found guilty of being one, and now they're at the remedies stage, and the DOJ is asking for the divesting of Chrome.
Which is such a marginal and sort of absurd. I mean, if Google really is this dangerous monopoly, I don't understand why Chrome is so central. Plus, who is it's all premised on someone buying Chrome, and once you take Chrome out of the Google orbit, it doesn't have any value.
Well, it
Who would want
becomes
to buy
like
it?
it does have some value, but it's like Firefox. Firefox is smaller than Chrome, but Google pays to have Google advertising in Firefox.
But it's like selling off Gmail or something. I don't know what the value of Gmail would be if it's taken out of the Google
Yeah,
orbit.
I think all of that's true. The only real value at Google is advertising. Everything else is a feature of advertising.
Yeah, and you just were saying that Google is not an advertising monopoly, but you and I have talked about this before, whether or not Google is an advertising company. The Google stock doesn't seem to have been impacted, so I'm not sure the markets are too bothered.
Well, because it ends up not changing anything. Let's imagine Chrome is sold, someone buys it, and makes $1 billion a year by having a deal with Google, like Apple does. What's changed? Nothing.
And I'm not sure what's even changed for Google.
Even for Google, nothing's
I mean, they
changed.
just outsource Chrome.
Yeah,
Who would buy it though?
I would if I could. If
You don't have $1 billion, but I mean, Musk,
well, no, you'd go and do a
Microsoft,
deal with Google.
Apple, Amazon.
The buyer would do a deal. You'd go to Google and say, "Give it to me for nothing. Give me $1 billion, and I'll just keep it running for you."
Yeah, that's the kind of backroom deal that, given the visibility of this and the involvement of the Justice Department, that's not going to happen.
Well, that's the only deal possible, because Chrome will need a revenue stream from someone, and the obvious people who will give them one is Google.
Yeah, it's an absurd decision in an absurd narrative. And meanwhile, they're fighting not just the last war, the war before the last war, because everything's moving on to AI, and Chrome is a traditional browser. So the whole thing is, you couldn't make it up. It's so absurd.
Yeah. Well, next up, Microsoft and Uber. The idea that Uber is a monopoly is equally laughable, and Microsoft, there isn't a single business that it isn't competing with other big businesses in. So I don't see it.
Well, as you've said before, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, the Democrats are still very suspicious of private companies and of the market. And if we're to get to where we began with government as a service, that needs to change. So that's the opportunity and challenge, I think, during the Trump administration, is for the Democrats to catch up and rethink their positions, because clearly it doesn't win at the ballot box, and it's reactionary and absurd.
And it leaves a huge space, because I don't know about you, Andrew, I'm not comfortable in a world where the Democrats seem less sane than the Republicans, where the Republicans appear to be the sane ones. That doesn't give me comfort, because we all know the Republicans don't really care about the people.
Well, what's going to happen, and we need to end now, I mean, what's going to happen out of this Ramaswamy Musk thing is that government's going to get one way or the other. Traditional government departments are going to get decimated. But what the Democrats need to do is not just come in and say, well, we're going to reinvest in government. It needs to rethink it profoundly. It'd be interesting to see over the years whether this is going to happen, Keith.
Yep. Agreed.
Well, that was the week. It was an interesting week, even though it was a short week because of Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, Keith. And we will be back in the first week of December, the last month of 2024, to talk more tech with Keith Teare, the publisher of That Was the Week newsletter. Keith, have a great week, and we'll talk next week.
Will do. Thanks, Andrew.